Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Yoji. With how successful the last Ramble video was, I thought I'd just make another one, because it's like not a lot of work for me, so I get more videos out for you to watch, which is always nice, and I got stuff to tell you, so here we go. In this video I will explain why Energy Shield is in most cases better than life currently in Path of Exile. And you're probably not surprised to hear this. I really hope you're not. I mean, maybe if you work for GGG you are, but otherwise I hope you're really not surprised. The reason for this is that when reading the comments under my videos or looking at Twitch chat discussions or Reddit posts, yeah, I know, I feel a lot of people do understand, or at least just repeat or parrot what other people say, that ES is better than life in way too many situations, but when you read their arguments for it, it feels like they don't understand the reasons behind it. The reasons why behind so many experienced players highly prefer Energy Shield over life these days on basically all builds. Like even freaking two-handed axe Cyclone these days uses Energy Shield if it's at all possible. And yeah, as I said before, like it's a bit worrying that even among the developers there seems to be a lot of discussion about this topic, when actually it is pretty clear what is going wrong here if you actually deeply look into the deep workings of how damage mitigation is done in Path of Exile right now, and also at the recent developments of damage and damage types that happened in PoE. It's actually pretty clear why ES is better than life, so let's have a look at that. Most people seem to think that the main reason for this is that you can get roughly twice as much ES than you can get life with the same investment. Don't fixate on that number too much, it's just roughly twice as much. So yeah. And that is actually a big part of it. That is actually that basically sums a lot of it up, but you have to look a little bit deeper to maybe also understand what would need to change for this not to be the case, for ES not to dominate the meta as much as it does right now. So with very low investment into life or ES, you can end up with 4 to 5k life and maybe 8 to 10k ES, right? And if you go a bit heavier on the investment, such as being a strength stacking build or getting a Calm's Heart, you will get to around 7 to 8,000 life, and for the same investment you can get roughly maybe 12 to 16k ES-ish, which is already quite a lot, right? And if you go all out, you can get over 10,000 life, for example on an Explosive Arrow Blood Magic character who just goes all out, wears a Calm's Heart, and just goes insane. You can get 10k, 12k ES. I've seen Mosi do it, and it's pretty amazing. And I've also seen very tanky Essence Drain characters, for example, have way above the 20,000 Energy Shield mark. So yeah, it's possible if you go really ham on, especially on the defensive and ES pool side. So Energy Shield builds have roughly twice as much of a life pool, or ES pool, of an effective health pool. Although that word is a bit tricky because it also takes in other forms of mitigation. But yeah, you have basically twice as much life. Now, if you are one of those individuals who are into critical thinking, you might wonder, hey, but Yoji, you can also mitigate damage in other ways. And yes, that is actually how you make life builds work in endgame in the current meta, because life builds are, at the moment, pretty much viable for all content. It's not a problem to kill Shaper, do Guardians, Uber Zeri, all that on life builds. It's just easier on ES builds. And what you do is you invest into other forms of mitigations on top of life. So let's have a look at a little bit of those, some of those options a little bit, so we can understand it more. For veteran players, this will be not much new, but let's just refresh a little bit, right? So first of all, there are two general ways to mitigate damage in Path of Exile, by mitigating how much damage the hit does to you, and by reducing the number of hits you take. So ways to reduce the damage you take per hit would be, for example, armor or elemental resistances. Ways to reduce the number of hits you take would be evasion, dodge, block, spell block, all of that stuff, right? So hit avoidance alone is usually not enough to reliably keep you alive, and single hits that are hard enough to one-shot you can still get you, because you will only avoid, let's say, 75% of the hits. So if you take 100 hits, 25 will hit you, and if all of those hits kill you, you're dead. Basically how it works, to really simplify it. So yeah, hit avoidance is really, really useful in those like shotgunning scenarios, AoE overlap scenarios. For example, you probably had that happen to you before in Dried Lake. You have like a pack of like, I don't know, let's say like 10 of those Chaos Snakes. And they're like maybe they're a blue pack, they have like powerful crits or increased damage. They all line up and shoot you at the same time you die. If you have like evasion or block or dodge, you're very likely not to die there, or porcupines as well. And some people tend to think that one-shots are the only thing that matters in PoE. That's really not true. Like, have you ever died to porcupines? That's not a one-shot. That's a rapid succession of hits. And those scenarios are the reason why stuff like Cast When Damage Taken Immortal Call are still very popular, especially in hardcore. Or while Roomies is so good, and block is so good, because you can actually like, if I don't know, 15 to 20 porcupine hits are needed to kill you. Yes, they are happening at the same time, but if you block half of them, you're already good to go. Okay, on the next step, if we look further into mitigation, mitigation can be divided up to what be divided into what type of damage they mitigate, such as physical damage, elemental damage, chaos damage. Elemental damage is mainly mitigated by our resistances, and it's balanced around us having 75% each. There are not many ways to reduce elemental damage any further without like going crazy on investment. The main way would be to up the resistance cap, for example by using flasks or purity auras. The easiest way to run purity auras is usually going low life, using a prison guardian shield for example, and running multiple resistance flasks is also a way, like a topaz, a ruby, and a sapphire flask. And that's usually a lot easier for energy shield builds, as they get to use 5 utility flasks, and yeah, they can just be like, I'm gonna run what do you run? A Taste of Hate, a Dying Sun, and a Vessel of Ingtar. Oh, GG, that's already all 3 resistances done. Other good ways to reduce being hit by elemental damage, so Spell Block is really good, Spell Dodge is also very nice, and those are available to both the S and life builds at the same time, which is good. So yeah, and that is because most elemental damage really comes from spells, because there are not that many elemental attacks in the game. There are like a few mobs who do high elemental damage with attacks, for example those barrage guys, who are with Vagan in some of the Vagan quests. Those guys actually do elemental barrages that do insane elemental attack damage, but that's very, very rare. And in those cases, evasion is actually great to have, because yeah, you just evade that. Okay, on the other hand, there's physical damage. It's another big part of damages. And that can be mitigated through armor, endurance charges, basalt flasks, conversions like Taste of Hate, Lightning Coil, Cloak of Flame, that's also a good one. And life builds are very, very good at mitigating physical damage. Not only because in the life area of the tree there are like all the endurance charges, and armor builds also get their stats from there, like the armor increased stat. And yeah, back when physical damage was the main threat in the game, so like kind of like up to, I think in 2.1 was like the first time when like the first buffs to monster damage, elemental damage really happened. And 2.0 was all about physical mitigation. That was when after that patch, people were like, nerf Taste of Hate, nerf Lightning Coil, it's too crazy, we need other options. But then once the Basalt Flask came out, it kind of like became easier and easier for all builds to basically mitigate physical damage. Right, what else? I'm kind of lost my train of thought here. So yeah, physical damage used to be very, very dangerous. And yeah, evasion, dodge, block helps against physical damage from attacks. And spell dodge, spell block, all that kind of stuff helps against physical damage from spells, which for example for evasion builds used to be a huge problem, which is why Lightning Coil used to be so good. So yeah, at some point GGG found that a lot of monsters were doing too little damage in endgame with their spells. I think that was about a year ago, and they started... once they started buffing that, I think almost everyone noticed those spark skeletons suddenly started to do a crap ton of damage in high-end maps. It was crazy. Elemental damage from like monster spells become more and more of a threat. They buffed more and more of the damage values that were way too low, which is good. I think it's nice to have like to need a more diverse forms of mitigation, not just go all out on physical mitigation and be able to do endgame. So yeah, that was kind of really nice. And the only other thing before those buffs happened that really needed you to have some ally mitigation was really Uber Atziri and Atziri. So that was kind of that was back in the day when like RF builds used to be the shit for Atziri killing, especially in hardcore. So yeah, there was kind of like a shift happening there, and especially for endgame mapping. So energy shield builds already there have an easier time, as we looked at before, to mitigate elemental damage, so they became more popular. That was like kind of like naturally happening. Around the same time, Leech was also buffed, because without Leech, energy shield was not very good. And yeah, they reworked Leech, and after they did that, Leech was kind of like so weak that it was really like you needed a lot of investment to get going, and people kind of like stayed away from Leech-based builds, which a lot of energy shield-based builds are, because you don't have natural regeneration or like percentage-based regeneration without Zealot's Oath. And also during that time, more and more solutions for the problems of the S builds got introduced. For example, Skyforth, Valyrium for the stun problems. The new Chayula Amulet Dispatch, and Kiara's Determination, the Silver Flask that gives you Freeze, Curse, and Stun immunity for short duration. And Flask uptime in general is really high at the moment, and with stuff like Vessel of Winter, Flask power level is also really high, not only at the moment, it has always been really high. And yeah, with all that stuff combined, like insanely powerful Flasks, high clear speed for high flask uptime, Pathfinder is also another thing. It's not a surprise that ES builds got, over that kind of like change happening, got another buff, which is basically, hey, you can use 5 utility flasks, and those have become a lot stronger through secondary effects and newly released flasks like Dying Sun and all that crap. So yeah, there's a lot of powerful stuff coming to help ES builds at the same time, over a course of time, which has led to the current meta. A life build usually has to reserve like 1 or 2 flask slots for life flasks. And that is because their life pool is lower, as we already said, and they kind of can't tank as much. So their reaction time is slower, so they have to have more, have to have instant regeneration or instant recovery. And it used to be an upside to be able to recover a large amount of your health pool at the press of a button. I mean, that's a good mechanic, right? That's like a powerful mechanic to have. But yeah, now it's more like having to use valuable flask slots for health recovery when they could be used for super insanely powerful utility flasks. It's kind of a downside now. And funny enough, like once you reach like over 10k life, a lot of life builds actually get rid of life flasks altogether, because they recover so little compared to your life pool. It's kind of like almost pointless anyways, especially if you actually have instant leech as well, or have really high regen. It kind of becomes pointless, or you definitely never use more than 1 life flask. It's really strange. So yeah, at that point you're basically in the S build without Vaal Discipline and without a higher ES pool, which is weird. And you're also not Chaos immune, or have extra auras from low life. So yeah, not that good. Energy shield builds in general have a higher health pool, which means, the longer reaction time, as we already said, as well as the option of using a gem socket. You take your life flask and you put it on a gem socket. That's what Vaal Discipline is. Except that it also lasts longer than any life flask, adds maximum health for its duration, basically makes you invincible, like completely immortal for the duration, unless you get one shot through like 25 plus K, whatever how much ES you have, which is just too good. It feels like it's just too good at this point, especially like with ES builds and as strong as they are right now. That thing is just too much. So yeah, life builds just do not have a comparable option. There's like nothing that compares to Vaal Discipline at all whatsoever. Okay, what else do we have? A lot of people actually think that one of the big problems of ES builds that make ES builds a lot more powerful than life builds is the Ghost Reaver Vaal Pact combination, together with powerful leech sources like Vessel of Winter, even the Life Leech gem, stuff like that. Because Vessel of Winter at that point acts like a better version of a life flask. And of course, if you think about it, this leech is available to life builds as well. but Vaal Pact sits in an area of the passive tree that has very little life and a lot of energy shield. So basically taking Vaal Pact as a life build, for the most part, is just not point efficient. And ES builds usually do not even have regen, so the downside of Vaal Pact does not even apply to them, which is it's always a bit risky if you don't have a downside. And the Skyforth has the same downside as Vaal Pact, which basically it's basically not a downside. Let's be honest here. It's at this point, Vaal Pact's downside on an ES build is not a downside. Skyforth does not actually have a downside. I mean, it's not like you want to use it on your Zealot's Oath Essence Drain build anyways, right? So maybe it's time to put Vaal Pact, the node Vaal Pact on the passive tree, back to where it used to be. Not many of you will remember this, but Vaal Pact used to sit under the Scion Life wheel, back when it was a wheel, not a rectangle, next to the Berserking attack speed cluster. It's like between Duelist, Marauder, and Scion. Maybe even move it next to Unwavering Stance or Blood Magic. Maybe even move it down there. Because down there it actually has a downside, because that's where all the good regen nodes are anyways, and that's also where the life is, and it's a life-centric mechanic. Would be kind of interesting, I think, to put it there. Would make it very much available for Berserkers, though. Maybe that's a bit crazy, because Berserkers with easy access to Vaal Pact, I think I can see being crazy as well. But that's just a random idea I had the other day when I was in Carv's chat, and we just talked about like Vaal Pact being a bit problematic. It was a pretty cool discussion as well. So yeah, Vaal Pact can't really be the problem because it's available to life-based builds. Maybe it's just the position, but Instant Leech in general seems to be a bit problematic at this point, let's be honest. It seems a bit too crazy. The stuff you can leech through is clearly stuff that was never meant to be leeched through, like the Kamehameha beam of Shaper. I don't think it was intended to be leeched through. So yeah, we can't really say that ES is OP because of Instant Leech. It's more like the ES is really good in the Vaal Pact area of the tree, and the Vaal Pact area of the tree is good because Vaal Pact is good. So yeah, in part that's one of the reasons ES is powerful. Like basically another reason on top of the stack that we already looked at. And yeah, in that area, making a 180% maximum life build, like in the top right-ish area of the tree, takes you generally about like 10-ish passive points more than making a 230-ish increased maximum ES build, taking all the other same nodes. That's usually what we're looking at. And that's before intelligence as well. So yeah, only in the bottom left area of the passive tree around Blood Magic, it's really at all viable to go for life-based builds at all. So normally only two-handed builds go for life-based these days. And maybe Facebreaker as well, because they need a lot of uniques. Because either if you're two-handed you can use Kaum's Heart, and if you are Facebreaker you need the uniques. There are also some bow builds that are better off as life than ES. That's kind of really it though. Like, I don't think any spellcaster is really better as life. Righteous Fire is maybe another option as well, like a real Righteous Fire build, although you can do low life Righteous Fire, and it's insanely strong. Okay, but I'm kind of getting sidetracked here. So if you go back to the topic of damage mitigation, which we originally started, damage mitigation becomes very apparent where the problem lies, and that it is pretty irrefutable that ES trumps life in most scenarios. As mentioned in the beginning, you usually get about twice as much energy shield as you can get life for similar investment. That equals to 50% damage reduction. Because if you have twice as much life, you can take twice as much damage. That's the same as taking half damage. Now try to get 50% damage reduction on any other build or in any other way from one source. That's very hard to do. Usually it requires a lot of investment and the damage reduction is specific to one type. So you will end up needing multiple layers, such as, Lightning Coil, Basalt Flask, Fortify, those stuff. You usually get like 20 to 30% reductions. So if you have enough of those, you kind of end up with similar to 50%. All the sources of very high damage reduction, like 50%, have very strict conditions applied to them. Like Kintsugi, for example, has a really high damage reduction, but there is a strict condition of, if you've been hit recently, say goodbye to it for a while. So it's not as easy. And also usually it's only to, like, a lot of those are only to certain damage types as well. So there are a few ways to mitigate all damage your character takes, like from all types. Like elemental damage and physical damage from attacks and from spells. An example for that would be Mind Over Matter, Kintsugi as mentioned before. But damage over time, for example, circumvents those as well. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and some of the stuff that you take a lot of damage from even is not an attack or a spell, so it cannot be blocked, evaded, or like avoided in any form except for manual dodging. Like Detonate Dead, EA, those cannot mitigate it at all by block, dodge, spell dodge. And yeah, there's basically only one thing, that is universal mitigation to all types of damage. To hits, non-hits, spells, attacks, and non-spell non-attacks. From like any possible source at any time, unconditional. That is having a higher life pool. It's the best universal form of mitigation. Think about that for a second. Like the only thing that protects you from everything at all times is having a higher life pool, or having a higher ES pool. Well, ES, Chaos damage, was originally made to bypass Energy Shield. But Chaos Inoculation grants immunity to that, and Chevron's Wrappings negates the downside as well to make low life possible, or more easily accessible. It's possible without a shafts, of course. So, with that in mind, ES is basically a way to get 50% universal, unconditional damage reduction, while even the conditional, non-universal damage reductions usually only go up to like 20-30%. So yeah, ES is better. It's numerically better in all situations, except very, very few when, like, let's say you stack so much physical mitigation that you basically become immune to physical damage. At that point, yeah, ES is not better against physical damage anymore for your specific purpose. That's why a lot of lab farmers, for example, go as a Juggernaut, have a shit ton of physical mitigation through Armor, Fortify, Endurance Charges, Basalt Flask, Immortal Call. And they are with very low investment, lower investment than any ES build, farm the Überlab. And that's good. Having niche purpose like that is good. But I don't think life builds should have a niche purpose, like one niche purpose, and everything else, ES is just better. So yeah, ES, as we just looked at, used to have a lot of downsides though. So it used to always, like ES always was like this. It always was universal and very efficient to get a high ES pool. But stun used to be a serious problem that you had to look into. Elemental status immunity was not as easy to get as it is right now, due to flask uptime, having more solutions for it as well. And yeah, ES basically has lost all downsides on top of being the universal form of damage mitigation with the highest value. It's really not a surprise at all why ES is so good, right? So yeah, all other ways of mitigation either have a downside or a condition. ES doesn't. So yeah, and that's maybe you've sometimes wondered, because that's why Volatile Bloods are always taken as like the prime example as to why ES-based builds are better than life. Like whenever someone is like, but life-based builds are okay, and then they're like, yeah, and then you die to a Volatile. Because Volatile Blood basically sums up the whole problem why ES is so good. It does very high damage, so it can one-shot you. That's like the first requirement. It deals mixed physical and elemental damage. Try to mitigate that. It cannot be avoided by evasion, dodge, or block at all, because it's neither a spell nor an attack, so you basically have to avoid it manually or face tank it. And as the monster is already dead when it happens, Even curse defenses, which I kind of like took out of the equation here a little bit because they're actually pretty damn good. But they are available to all builds, so you can kind of like tag them onto everything. And yes builds, especially low life builds, can stack more blasphemy curses. So I kind of didn't want to add insult to injury on that one. But yeah, curses don't protect from it because the monster is dead and its normal main hand damage is applied to it. So you basically have to have a high enough life pool, insane elemental and physical mitigation, or you die. And I don't think volatiles are telegraphed enough for that. So yeah, if you ever wondered, hey, why is ES better than life? That's why. I hope that cleared up some of your misconceptions that you might have had in the life versus energy shield debate. And yeah, I'm just having a good ramble here. Subscribe for more Path of Exile content as always. I'm Yoji, and I will see you nerds soon.